Hello, my name is Bill Whitney, and I work in the Office of Creative Inquiry, and I'm also an adjunct professor of theater at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I'm here today to talk to you about asking better questions. So, as you know, this week's lesson is about making a positive impact with your green entrepreneurial venture. And the way to do that is to know how to ask the right questions to get to the point where your idea or your spark really translates into something real. So you're going to hear about a couple of methods, the SWOT analysis, pestle analysis for doing that. But I'm going to zoom out from the topic of green entrepreneurship altogether. And I'm going to lead you in the next few minutes through a technique that was not made up by me. It was made up by a nonprofit organization in Cambridge, Massachusetts called the Right Question Institute. And the method that they came up with is called the QFT, or the Question Formulation Technique. And it's an extremely simple but very profound method that I think you will all find very useful in all aspects of your life. So let's get started. And I'll tell you a little bit about the steps of the QFT, and we'll go through the ways that it can be of use to you. So the first thing, as you'll see in the first slide, is the first step in the QFT is to design a Q focus. And this is the name that they've put onto the idea that's going to spark all of these questions, right? Now, what we're going to do today and what I'm going to lead you through is just a version of this exercise. So obviously you can take this technique and apply it to the specifics of your green entrepreneurial venture. But for today, I've just picked a generic Q focus, and hopefully that can spark some initial questions and maybe questions that can ultimately be used in your specific idea, but maybe not. But it'll at least give you an idea of how this technique works and get you thinking about some of the ways that you can ask better questions. So the Q focus can be really almost anything. The one thing that it cannot be is a question. So you can't answer a question with questions, but it can be almost anything else. It can be an image. It can be a drawing. It can be a quote or a saying. It can be a thought or a statement. It can be an idea. It can be an opinionated sentence. So a value judgment on something. It can be a math equation, really almost anything that you want. So anything that's going to spark your ideas. So for your examples, your green entrepreneurship ventures, let's say that you're coming up with a new wastewater treatment system. So maybe your Q focus is a lake in Kenya, or a river in Bangladesh, or whatever it is that might spark some questions related to that topic or area. That's just an example. You can really come up with your own. But for today, I've come up with a Q focus that's kind of generic, but again, we'll just give you an idea of the technique. So here's the real core of the QFT. In the next slide, you can see the 4 essential rules for asking questions. Now, again, these are simple but profound, and they were developed by the Right Question Institute over many, many, many months and years of research and trying to get to the core of what asking questions is really all about. So here's what they've decided. And these rules, now, typically I would say, don't bother following rules to the letter, but in this case, you have to. So number 1, ask as many questions as you can. All right, that makes sense. Number 2, do not stop to discuss, judge, or answer the questions that you ask. Number 3, write down every question exactly as it is stated. And number 4, change any statement that comes out of your brain or your mouth into a question, right? So you're not going to write down any statements. Everything's going to have a question mark at the end of it. So we can discuss a little bit or think a little bit about what might be difficult in following these rules. And the number 1 rule that people always come up with and say is the most difficult to follow, of course, is number 2, right? Do not stop to discuss, judge, or answer any question, which is what we want to do to ourselves all the time, right? You ask a question, you want to think, ooh, is that a good question or a bad question? Well, we're going to get to that. So in this first process, this first part of the exercise, which is really about divergent thinking, it's about going from a central idea into 1,000 different ideas. For this part, we are not going to judge or answer anything. You're just going to write down every question. So here's what you need for the exercise. I want you to get yourself a piece of paper, preferably a big piece of paper, but if you just have a regular piece of notebook paper or something like that, that's fine. Get yourself a marker or a pen. And what you're going to do is number down the side of that page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you just number in order. And every one of those numbers is where you're going to put one of the questions that you ask in the order that you think of them or ask them. Okay. So here we go. The Q focus for today in the next slide is the impact of a green entrepreneurial venture, right? Like I said, very generic, very simple, and just a starting point for getting things going. Now, notice it's not an opinionated statement, or it's not a value judgment statement. It's not the positive impact or the negative impact of a green entrepreneurial venture. It's just the impact of a green entrepreneurial venture, right? It's a concept. And so that's all we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to ask you to hit pause, and I'm going to ask you to take 10 minutes and come up with as many questions as you can about that concept. Again, number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to as many as you come up with. And the only piece of advice I'll give you is, as you're asking questions, don't let yourself stop the first time that you think, oh, I've asked all the questions I can ask, right? Push through that. If you get to 10 and you think, I can't think of anything else, push through that and see if you can come up with a few more, or even look at the questions you've already asked and see if you can come up with questions about those questions. All right. Because the point is to get as much thinking as you can. All right. So hit pause. Step 1. We're going to go through this, ask all the questions that you can, and don't forget the 4 rules. All right. See you in a few. All right. You're back. I hope that was interesting, and I hope that yielded a whole bunch of questions. But even if you only got 7 or 8, that's better than nothing, right? But if you got 100, that's even better. Okay, so now you've got your list of questions, and the next step of the exercise is going to be to categorize each question into closed-ended or open-ended, right? Pretty obvious what those are, but let's just review really quickly. A closed-ended question is any question that can be answered with a short statement or yes, no, or a brief fact, something that is clearly and briefly answerable. An open-ended question is just the opposite. It's a question that might lead to more debate or really doesn't have a clear answer, okay? And every question pretty much falls into one of these 2 categories, but there might be a few questions on your list that fall into both categories that could be either a closed-ended question or maybe an open-ended. And if you get to one of those, you're just going to mark it as both. All right. So you're going to go down that list of questions from 1 to the end, mark every closed-ended question that you asked with a C, mark every open-ended question that you asked with an O. And if you get to one of those questions that could be either one, mark it with a C/O or O/C. Okay. So this shouldn't take you very long to do. Pause the recording. Take it for about 3 minutes or so and do that with your list. And then we'll come back and we'll keep talking about it. All right, pretty simple, right? So here's what I want you to do. One more part of this step of the QFT is to go down that list, and I want you to find one of your closed-ended questions. It really doesn't matter which one, but any question you marked with a C, and I want you to change that question to an open-ended question. So a question that's clearly answerable, you're going to change to something that's maybe not answerable. Change a few words or change the question itself, or however you can do that. Write that new open-ended version right next to the closed-ended version. And then you're going to do the opposite. Go down the list, find an open-ended question that you marked with an O, and change it to a closed-ended question. All right. So take 1 minute to do that. Again, hit pause. And when you come back, we'll go to the next step of the exercise. All right. If we were in a group together, we would take a few minutes to discuss what are the advantages and disadvantages of closed-ended and open-ended questions. But the more important thing for today is just to get you thinking about the fact that, yeah, all questions can be pretty much put into one of those 2 categories, and that there are clear advantages and disadvantages to each one. And you yourself might actually have a preference, but we're going to get to that in just a second. The next step, and almost the final step of the QFT, I told you this was simple. The next step is to prioritize your questions. So the next thing you're going to do is look down that list, and of all the questions you came up with, again, whether that was 5, 10, 20, 100, whatever, all of those questions, you're going to pick the top 3 most important questions to you. Now, there's no hard and fast criteria for this, and this is really where you get to use your convergent thinking and go from the 100 things that you put down on the page, try to get them down, reduced down to 2 or 3 core things. So in this case, 3 questions. Find the best 3 questions on your list, okay? And just mark them, just put a check next to them, whatever it is, all right? So I've put up here on the slide a couple of ideas for criteria that you can use, right? You can prioritize questions by which ones you consider the most important or relevant to the subject. You can prioritize questions by which ones will allow you to solve the problem or improve the situation. Again, this is all up to your interpretation. Or you can prioritize the questions that are the most answerable, okay? And this is really up to you. So take a few minutes and do that. Hit pause one more time. And then when we come back, we'll discuss this step of the exercise and wrap it up. Okay, you got your top 3 questions? So take a look at them and take a minute to think to yourself, what were the reasons that you chose to apply in order to pick those prioritized questions, your top 3 questions? What criteria did you use? Was that, again, the ones that are the most answerable or the ones that are the least answerable? It's really, and this is what starts to get you into thinking about the way that you think, okay? Which is important when you set off in any venture. Are you a more concrete thinker? Are you a more open-ended, nuanced type of thinker? And there's no right or wrong here, of course. But knowing how you think and knowing what's important to you in this process is not just going to help you ask better questions, but it's going to help you know why you're asking those questions, okay? And then the final question to ask you is, and this is a concrete exercise, look at that list, look at the 3 questions you marked as priority, and note which numbers of questions they were. In other words, where do those priority questions fall on your big list of questions? Were they the first 3 questions that you asked? Were they the last 3 questions? Were they somewhere in the middle? Were they scattered all around? Was one at the beginning, one at the end, one in the middle? It can go either way, but take a look at that. And again, this will tell you how you think. And when you go to do this, to apply this method to your actual idea, to your actual venture, it's going to tell you, yeah, some of the questions that I come up with first, some of those gut level instinctive questions are the ones that are really important to me at the end. Or take the opposite, and you could say, I have to ask 100 questions before I get to the ones that are really meaningful. And again, there's no right, wrong, good, bad here. It's just different ways of thinking. But if you understand the way that you think in your process, which is what this exercise helps you to do, then you can know how to apply that going forward as you start to turn your ideas into reality, okay? So that's it. That's the QFT. The final step, and again, if we were in a room together, I would ask you to spend a few minutes reflecting on this, which you can do on your own. Reflect on this. What did this method tell you about asking questions in general? What did it tell you about how you think? What did it tell you about the kinds of questions that you prioritize in your life? And so I hope this was a good exercise, and I hope this was a useful exercise. And again, in this week's lesson, you're hearing about all different kinds of analyses and all different kinds of ways to understand the value of your idea and how you can really make it real. I hope this QFT is one step along the way and one tool in your toolkit to help you to do that. So thank you for your time, and enjoy the class. And I can't wait to see what you all come up with. Take care.